Yeah, I mean, I'll come to, like, Chinmay. Do you think we will see another rookie go into a top team? Will we see let's say a Mick Schumacher, rather than going to Haas, he goes straight to Ferrari? Rather than, I don't know, Verstappen going to Toro Rosso, he goes straight to Red Bull. Do you think we'll see that again?
Highly doubt it. I mean, even back in the days when Lewis came into McLaren as a rookie, it was extremely rare to see a rookie go into a top team already back then. And especially with the sort of driver academies programs and the way everything's set up nowadays, it's very, very pretty much next to impossible to see a rookie go into a top team.
But as he was both a rookie going into a top team and the first black driver to ever drive a race in the sport, which is a real, like, you'd think that with obviously F1 isn't a meritocratic sport, it's not a level playing field.
We like to think it is, but it's not.
Yeah, and if you've got more money, then you're much more likely to get into that. But I mean, are you sort of surprised that it took even until 2007 to get a black driver into F1? Because that seems, if you think about other sports, you think about football. We had, I think the first, I can't say who the first black England player was, but that was probably the 70s, the 80s. And even, like, we're getting to 2000, it's almost like last decade, and we still didn't have a driver in F1 that was black until 2007.
Yeah, I mean, Formula One's a very different sport to football. That's not a fair analogy, I don't think, just because of the numbers of people that we have in the sport. And yeah, traditionally, I mean, we talk about, like, today, thinking about it's not meritocracy, but traditionally it was owner drivers, right? And then, you know, throughout the 80s it starts to become more and more professional, and that gets removed. But if we look at let's be real, the discrepancy in inequality, especially among very high upper class drivers, which are going to be the ones who are driving, yeah, to be honest, I'm not surprised that by, you know, late 90s we didn't have any black drivers, but the fact we still don't have any, and in F2, do we have any?
I don't think
so either. No, I mean, that's a little bit shocking to me.
Yeah, and we'll come on to that later. Obviously, with the work that Lewis Hamilton is doing to bring in more black drivers. But I mean, Chinmay, do you think that 2007 was too late in a way?
I don't know, it's hard to tell, but the fact is we still haven't got another driver. It's still very surprising to this day.
And obviously, when he came into the sport, and like throughout his junior career, Hamilton had to deal with racist abuse, which is something that's absolutely abhorrent. But I feel like there needs to be that more just representation in the sport, because obviously that is the thing. We have Hamilton, and as we'll come on to, he's become the most successful driver of all time, but he's still almost standing alone against standing alone as the sole black driver in what is quite a overwhelmingly white sport, and that does need to change. And obviously at the start of his career in the junior formula, he had to deal with racist abuse, and even at the start of his F1 career he had to deal with it. I remember, I think it was 2008 in Spanish pre-season testing, Hamilton was being having racist abuse held at him during testing. I think it's good to see that we've come a long way from, or we've come away from that. I don't think we'd ever see that happen at a racetrack ever again. But it is a bit concerning that even as Hamilton was coming into the sport, people felt confident enough to heckle him in such an abhorrent way.
Yeah, I think it does come down to representation, like you said. It'd be lovely if we could make sure that Formula One was a meritocracy. The people who go out and put the effort and the hard work in and have the talent are the ones that end up in the 20 seats at the top of the table. But that will never be perfect, right? But what you can do is you can get more people interested at the bottom end of things, and that's how societies have been improving in the last 20 years, right? We see the kind of things that Warwick Uni are doing with some women in engineering, etc. And that does start. I've just said we start from the bottom, but that starts from the top as well. You can generate interest. If you get those individuals interested in the first place, then you don't have to put in hard measures. Definitely you need someone as a representative for those minority groups, and Hamilton's been doing an incredible job of that.
Yeah, nothing to say more there. I mean, it is true that you can not just generate from the bottom, you can bring it from the top as well. But I think that the fact that Formula One, to some extent, is not really done that as much as other parts of society have, which I kind of find a bit awkward still nowadays.
It does seem that it's getting maybe slightly better as we've reached the last few years, and we'll come on to that later. But first, we'll address his 2007, 2008 seasons, which are, I'd say, the best rookie, or either rookie season and then sophomore season that any driver has had in easily the last 20, 30, 40 years, maybe even of all time. So Hamilton takes 4 wins in his maiden season, if I'm right in saying. Maybe it's 3 and it might be 4 in 2008, but he gets 6 podiums in his first 6 races. That's incredible consistency from a driver that was, compared to the ages we have now, obviously they're younger. So Hamilton was coming into the sport at 23, but that was quite young for the time. And to put in that level of being up there straight away, we normally think that drivers need to take time to build up, need to take time to get there. But Hamilton on the podium first, I think it was 5 races.
The internet says 9.
First 9 races in a row.
9 consecutive podium finishes from debut, which is nuts, isn't it?
Was it his 10th in France, I think, was the first race that he didn't finish on the podium? I'll let Jack Google that. But the amount of the consistency that needs. 9 podiums in your first 9 races, that's unheard of.
It is unheard of. I mean, especially on top of the extra pressure, you partner next to the defending world champion in a top team, and it's your first year. To have this happen in today's F1 is pretty much unheard of. It's just mesmerizing, brilliant.
Yeah. So I've got the results now. So 3rd, 2nd, 2nd. So 1/3, 4 seconds in his first 5 races. Then he takes 2 wins. Then another 3rd, and another 3rd, and it's only at the 10th race at the Nürburgring that he didn't score a podium, and then even after that he takes another win. So 4 wins in the first season, 4 wins in the first season, 9 podiums in the first 9 races. It's off the scale how impressive that first season was for Hamilton, and without the mistake in China where he goes off into the gravel, but McLaren probably should have called him in earlier, and then his engine cutting out in Brazil, leaving him down the back of the grid and just unable to make up the points to prevent Raikkonen from taking the title. We would be looking at a first ever rookie world champion, obviously not including 1950, which I think it just gave us that sort of taste to come about how impressive Lewis Hamilton's career has been.
What's he doing? He's not done well enough, has he? Yeah. Why hasn't he won every championship since?
Yeah, I mean, but do you want to add anything, Jack? Because
that season, 4 drivers won races, split almost evenly. The 2 Ferraris of Raikkonen and Massa, and the 2 McLarens of Hamilton and Alonso. Now, those are some names in the mid-2000s which are terrifying. Alonso had just come off the back of 2 world championships. Kimi won that year, and then Massa is probably one of, if not the best driver to never win a world championship, right? And yeah, he goes and he competes with them straight off, no question about it at all. He must have been leading the championship after race 9, right?
I'll
Surely.
get that up quickly.
Well, you don't finish on the podium 9 times in a row and then not lead the championship.
So
surely.
after race 9, Hamilton is 12 points ahead with the point system that they had. So that was a 7th place. That's probably 23rd. That's about 30 points ahead. If we used our system, like roughly equivalent, a race win and a few more points.
Yeah. That makes him. Yeah, that's about reasonable. Point being, to get into a Formula One car and be able to do that is just off the charts. And he did get hit by bad luck in the last couple of races. But how can you say that? I don't think anyone's arguing. I think it is the best rookie season ever. But what I find is even more incredible than that is that he did that from the start and then faded at the end because of bad luck, not the other way round, right?
Yeah.
He had no warm-up time beyond F1 testing and a couple of practice sessions at the first race at Australia, and he was immediately competitive. Didn't he lead into the first corner at Australia?
I think he might have still been second. I can get it up quickly.
I think Kimi did get Grand Slam on that race. So I remember he.
Yeah, but he could have overtaken him later on that.
Probably.
Oh, so I think Hamilton started 4th and then overtook Alonso into 3rd, and I think that was the he's arrived. He's going around the outside of Alonso at turn 1 at Melbourne. And if we look at his first and second seasons, first season he scores 109 points, which is still the greatest amount of points ever scored by a rookie driver, even with the new point system. Like, it was 10 points for a win back in the day, and then 8 for second, 6 for third, and then down to 1 point for 8th. Now it's 25 for a win, 18 for a second, 15, and so on. But it's still the most points ever scored by a rookie.
That's just unbelievable. It just shows how good Lewis Hamilton really was in that first season. I think, it's just very, very difficult to say in words just how impressive he was in that season.
Yeah, and then we may as well come on to his 2008 season as well, because he wins the title that season. He wins the title in his second season in F1. Obviously, there was the first and second season, so you think to that. But I can't think of a driver that's won a title that early on in their career.
Jacques Villeneuve did in 97.
Oh, yeah. So I think he's equal with Jacques Villeneuve for least amount of seasons before winning a title.
Interestingly, Villeneuve put 4 wins on the board on his first series as well, but Villeneuve was far from just an F1 driver, wasn't he?
Yeah.
That's the massive distinction between them.
He came from IndyCar, didn't he? Because obviously Canadian. But Hamilton wins the title in his second season. I mean, do any races from the 2008 season stand out to you? I know there's one in particular that stands out to me. Either of you? Well, I mean, I'll say mine. The 2008 British Grand Prix. Still, greatest ever winning margin for Lewis Hamilton. I think over a minute in treacherous conditions in his second season in F1. It's only his 27th, 28th race. It's mind-boggling how impressive Lewis Hamilton's early career was.
And not to mention, he became the youngest world champion at the time as well, only to be pipped by Sebastian Vettel a couple of years later. But still, to just do that, also that young as well, it just adds to that merit.
Yeah, and with the amount of pressure on him, the amount of just pressure to perform, he really, really knocks it out of the park. But we'll go to a break now, and when we come back, we'll talk about a period that wasn't so good for Lewis Hamilton's career, arguably through no fault of its own. And we're back. That was Smooth Operator by Sade, a song made infamous in F1 circles by Carlos Sainz, but it's not Sainz we're talking about, it's Lewis Hamilton. So, we'll come on to the next few years of his career. So, I'd say 2009 to 2012. So, the last few years of his McLaren career. They seem to almost bring... I'm trying to phrase it. It's like we had the highs of 2007, 2008, and then it sort of comes crashing back down a bit. Obviously, 2009 we can come to quickly, but the McLaren that year was terrible.
Yeah, no, he signed a contract for 5 years, interestingly, which is something we don't really see these days. So he had the car from 2008 to 2012. There was just, that was just how it was. And yeah, I think... What year was when McLaren had to pay like $100 million? I
want to say that was 07. I think it might be.
That was probably
that was when Alonso.
Yeah, that was kind of when that was starting to hit them, I think. And yeah, you're right. Car was a bit meh, really, wasn't it?
Yeah. So even though car was a bit meh, takes 2 wins at the end of the season. Hungary, a very very profitable stomping ground for Hamilton, obviously taking I think 8 wins at the track, and then managing to get one more at the second Singapore Grand Prix, the first one without any cheating. But then we do 2009. It's a bit of a write-off, not much you can do about it because the car wasn't that good. We come to 2010, obviously one of the greatest seasons.
Yeah, you say write-off, he was still like 5th or something, wasn't he?
Yeah, no, that's it. Impressive. I think it's just compared to last season. He scores 98 in 2008, but only 49 in 2009. But come to 2010, a new look F1 season with new point system, and I don't know. I can't. Right. So the 2010 season, it's one of the greatest in F1 history. But I think. Would you say? I'd say that it's up there.
Don't we always say 2012 is the better one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. 2010 was like right at the bottom of my dip of watching knowledge, so I might try and slip it off to Chinmay, but he's not. What can you remember much of it?
I don't remember too much about it, but I do remember Hamilton did take a couple of good wins as well, but he wasn't really much in the title fight that season. It was mainly just Vettel and Alonso just fighting it out that whole season.
So yeah, 2010 takes 3 wins in the end at I think it was here we go, Turkey, Canada and Belgium. So takes those 3 wins, finishes 4th in the championship behind Vettel, obviously, Webber and Alonso. Vettel taking his first world title. But then 2011 is one I want to talk about. This was a season that's probably, I think most people would say, was Lewis Hamilton's not weakest season, but the one he struggled the most with. I mean,
it was the first time he was beaten by a teammate, right?
Yeah,
so it was with the button in the car.
First time beaten by a teammate. I mean, do you know enough about it to go through sort of what happened that season?
I mean, we've had a little look. We're not completely blind on this, so it was just bad luck, wasn't it? Really. How many wins did he take that year? Was that the 1 year?
So 2011, he takes 2 wins. So at Germany and Abu Dhabi.
The fact that we're thinking like, oh wow, that's a low number of wins.
Yeah,
is pretty ridiculous. 2
wins, but only 3 more podiums at Australia, Spain, and Korea. But he suffers from a lot of incidents, especially with Felipe Massa. So they collide at Singapore, they collide at the Indian Grand Prix. I think they also collide in Japan as well. And it did seem that Hamilton was struggling a bit. And there were it was struggling, and it was difficult to almost say why. I mean,
I think that was the year that the new Pirellis were introduced, wasn't it? And I think with something like apparently Jenson Button was able to just extract more out of the tyres than Lewis Hamilton that year. That was just probably one of the many reasons why Button was much better than Hamilton that year. not to mention that brilliant win at Canada that Jensen did.
But with Hamilton struggling, obviously criticism of drivers comes in. But then Hamilton infamously says at the Monaco Grand Prix that because he's been called to the stewards so much, he says, maybe it's because I'm black, that's what Ali G says. And do you think that, obviously we don't want to say that there is, but do you think maybe there was double standards, or even just because Hamilton was such a trailblazer in that there hadn't been anyone like him in F1 before, a black F1 driver who had achieved the level of success that he had at that career. Second in his first season, first in his second season. 2009, no one's expecting him to do well because the car is so bad. 2010, he's still in the title race by the final race of the season. Obviously, a very outside chance. I think 24 points behind Webber, with 25 left on the table. But do you think that Hamilton, himself, thought that there was something else against him?
I think once he stepped up to F1, he was obviously more in the public eye because of that. I think maybe by 2011, 2012, that wasn't so much the case. But it's so hard to say how much of it is because he's this unprecedented talent, right? And if you can split that from the race thing. And then you've got to have this third effect, because he's one of those drivers that will race everyone hard. It sounds dumb, but we're seeing it with Verstappen. We saw it with Schumacher in the late 90s, early 2000s. These drivers that are world champion caliber they will take the track, they will take room from you, and that gets them in trouble sometimes. But that's what makes them world champions. And now I've said that about Verstappen, but
Jack predicts the 2021 championship. But I mean, Shinmei, do you think that, obviously we talk about criticism of Max Verstappen? I imagine in the early 2000s and late 90s they were talking about criticism of Schumacher. But do you think there maybe was something extra with Lewis Hamilton just because he was a black F1 driver, the first black F1 driver that we have seen and that we've seen since then? Do you think that, obviously, do you think that he felt he was being singled out for criticism? And do you think that the sport maybe at the time wasn't developed enough to not do that?
I think it's just a mixture of that, of what you just said. I think there is a partial truth to that. And also the fact that the way Lewis Hamilton just stormed onto the scene and everyone just expects him to perform, I think it's just probably that added expectation you have on top of that, which probably gave Hamilton a lot more stick than he really deserved.
Yeah. So 2011, one of the toughest seasons, I think the toughest season that Lewis Hamilton has had, and I'd argue that maybe 2012, the season we come on to now, is the second toughest. Hamilton loses at least, I'd say, almost 75 points through no fault of his own. I'll run through it. So at the European Grand Prix in Valencia, collides with Pastor Maldonado in, I think it was third place. I'll come back to that. So that loses him at least, I'd say, 10, 15 points if he wasn't in third place at that point. Then in 2012, sorry, let me just find it quickly. So later on in the season, 2012, he goes to Belgium, loses those points. Obviously, start line collision or first corner collision with Romain Grosjean. We don't know how many points he would have scored in that race, but he loses the chance to score that. Singapore, he's in the lead, retires with an engine failure. Abu Dhabi, he's in the lead, retires with an engine failure. Brazil, he's in the lead, he gets crashed into by Nico Hülkenberg. So that's 3 wins, an added podium. And there were also a lot of pit stop woes for McLaren that season, which I guess leads to his decision to go to Mercedes for 2013. I mean, would you say, like, obviously looking at it now, that's justified because obviously we've seen what he's done with Mercedes, but would you have said at the time that was the correct decision? I know a lot of F1 pundits thought he was barking up the wrong tree when he decided to go from what was a champion or title potential car. I'd say even in 2012 the McLaren might have won that championship without their issues, to go to Mercedes, who at that point were like a midfield team.
Yeah, it's a really, really interesting one. I think everything is seen in the light of McLaren is the team that has brought Hamilton to where he is. He signed for them when he was like 13, and he's spent about 3 months where he's not been in the McLaren Driver Academy. He's not been driving for them. He signed a 5-year contract at the end of 2007 for them. That's how long he's been there. He's, he spent 6 years at the team, and they've not done terribly, right? They've had improvement from 2011, and you're right. He's still getting race wins every single season. So yeah, to move to Mercedes is bizarre, isn't it? It's bonkers, but clearly, I don't know. There's two schools of thought here. Either he saw something in Mercedes, or he spoke to was it still Ross Brawn in charge at that point? Yeah, he spoke to them, and he sees something that we can't, or he thinks his career is on the down. He's doing what Daniel Ricciardo's done. Maybe there's a falling out behind the scenes, but I would like to think that he sees something in Mercedes that he doesn't see at McLaren. Because, they've been together so long that it would be a shame for that to happen behind the scenes. And I don't think... who was his teammate that year? It was still Button, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Those two seemed to get along fairly well. It wasn't the flare-ups that we saw with Alonso at the time. So, yeah, I mean, it's difficult to say, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's an incredibly bold decision. And it's one that has come to define his career in a good way, but... At the time, you think that maybe it is sort of like what Ricciardo has done, I guess, more with Renault, in a way. Going from that top team to that midfield team, hoping for success. But then, obviously, with Ricciardo, it didn't work out. He goes to McLaren, and now he's coming back up there. Whereas with Hamilton, goes from the top team to the midfield team. It looks like a foolish decision. No one really has done that before. But then it works out. But... at the time, it looked like not a stupid decision, but one that there must have been, like, people must have thought there was something behind the scenes that would have made him want to do that.
I think probably just also the fact that it was say that fast the last 4 years of that contract, that yes, McLaren was at the top, but they weren't really delivering that championship battle. A car that is able to fight with Red Bull and Sebastian Vettel, with that Sebastian Vettel's dominance. And I think it was not just that, but I think Niki Lauda played a very pivotal part in really pushing Hamilton to Mercedes. And yeah, it's probably just the fact that he did see something in Mercedes just coming up the ranks and stuff.
Yeah, and I guess the last season in this segment, 2013, takes one win. It's sort of what you'd expect, really. Obviously, that season, after the tyre blowouts in Silverstone's absolutely dominated by Sebastian Vettel, his greatest season in F1. I mean, Jack, did you want to add anything about 2013? Sort of like the calm before the storm, really, and the storm being about 70 wins.
It is, yeah. It's him being reunited with Rosberg as well, and now we look at it with the lens of 2021, knowing what happened 2014 through 2016, and you think, these two people don't know each other, but before they were great friends. They karted together previously. They came up through the ranks together. They both had good rookie seasons. So yeah, I mean, that was an interesting one. And then of course there's the dynamic of him replacing Michael Schumacher. Obviously some debate over who's the greatest driver of all time, and we forget that those two drove in the same period. I mean, not when they were both at their peaks, but they drove for the same team as well, just back to back. But yeah, 2013 itself, bit of a dull series. He makes sure that he keeps that win a season record going, which is a lovely one to have, isn't it? But yeah, beyond that, he was still fourth. He still beat Rosberg in the championship, but yeah, not much to say other than that.
Well, yeah, 2013, calm before the storm in more ways than one. But after the break, we'll come back and we'll talk 14 to 16. So sort of the first half of his Mercedes career, in his battle between Rosberg and Hamilton. But we are back with the Warwick F1 show, almost halfway through, and looking at the next few years of Lewis Hamilton's career, 2014 to 2016, which, now I think about it, that's 3 years of his career. We're into the 5th year, past that. It doesn't feel like there were 3 years from 14 to 16, does it? Not that.
Well, I mean, you're asking the maths student, so yes, if there were 3 years, I promise you there were 3 in there. It was an odd time for Formula One, wasn't it? We've seen periods of dominance in the past, especially recently. Schumacher, 2000 to 2004, Red Bull. That was less dominant, but still 4 victories in a row. But yeah, 2014 through 16 was something else.
Yeah, I think I want to say there were about 10 or so races from that during that period that Mercedes as a team didn't win. Which, when you look at there were about 60 odd races that over those 3 seasons, that is incredible. And Lewis Hamilton was part of that, obviously, with his teammate Nico Rosberg. Came out on top in the first 2. Rosberg takes the victory in 2016 before retiring from the sport. Would you say that almost that period pushed Lewis Hamilton to a higher level when you come to the later races or later seasons in his career? I'm talking like your 17s, your 18, your 19, your 20, and even maybe this year as well.
I think, yeah, 100%. I mean, you're battling against a fantastic driver in Nico Rosberg. I mean, the fact that, it took Nico Rosberg 3 years to win the championship off Lewis Hamilton, but I think not just that, but apparently the way he just showed his dominance in those 3 years, and obviously subsequently the dominance arguably got even more dominant. I think it really did just develop him and just took him to the highest level possible.
Yeah, and there must be some races from those 3 seasons that stand out to you. I mean, do you want to give us a few of them?
Spain, where both the Mercedes crashed, but
yeah. So there were a few incidents during that period. We had Spain 2016 when they crashed into each other, Belgium 2014 where they crashed into each other, Austria 2016 crashed into each other, and then at the start of the US Grand Prix in 2015, a race that won Lewis Hamilton his 3rd world title.
They went at it in Canada as well one year, didn't they? I can't remember. I think they did. I can't remember what year it was.
Was that 2014? I know they both had issues.
Yeah, it might have been.
So yeah, that is the amount of it was a good period for F1, I think, looking back on it. And I think it helped Lewis Hamilton become the driver that he is now, that driver that can put in astonishing levels of consistency. I was saying during the break, so from 2016 Malaysia, where he retired obviously with an engine failure, Lewis Hamilton went 92 races and had 1 DNF. He went 84 races and had 1 non-point scoring finish. That is levels of consistency we've never seen before.
Yeah, especially of course we've got more reliable cars these days, but the fact that Mercedes can, 1, give him a car that's good enough to do that, and then 2, he's able to keep it on the track. We compared to the... Let's have a look at the up-and-coming drivers from nowadays. Verstappen recently starting to look a lot more consistent, but about the same kind of time he was sticking it in walls at Monaco and and a bit all over the place. Same with Leclerc. He's had troubles with Vettel recently. Russell's put it in a wall behind the safety car. We see drivers make silly mistakes, right? He's done none of that. He's not wasted those 5 or 6 years where he's kind of like 75% the way to a title. He's there and he's been learning that entire time, and now his time's come and he's stepping up and he's throwing the gauntlet down to anyone else. Like, if you want to beat me, you're not going to have the opportunity to catch me on a bad year. You have to step up and just be better than me.
Yeah.
And I'm going to make sure that is as hard as possible.
I mean, and we'll bring in 17 to 20 or 17 to 19 into the discussion as well. And then I'll include 2020 in this. From that Malaysian race in 2016 to, I guess, probably Imola this season, I can only really think of one race-altering mistake that was his fault, and that's probably Germany 2019, where he slides off into the wall in wet conditions.
2 other people did the same, right?
Yeah, even that, after 2 other people did the same. And that's from Malaysia, that's from 2016, the end of 2016, to the beginning of 2021. One mistake that we can think of. I mean, can you think of any more?
No.
Yeah.
100% no.
Yeah. So one mistake that we can think of. He has one retirement in Austria 2018, where I think both the Mercedes retired.
Yeah, both the engines just coughed out then.
Yeah. So one mistake, one retirement from 2016, or the end of 2016 to sort of around the start of 2021. One mistake, one retirement. That is, I'd say that was the peak. That is peak Lewis Hamilton era. That is, I think, the era where no matter what, I think he's up there with he could almost be said to be the greatest of all time. Just the levels of consistency that requires. And we've got to remember, in 17 and 18, he was in some proper championship battles with Sebastian Vettel. And it was Ferrari cracking that meant, at the end, the season looked boring. It was like 30, 40-point gaps. It wasn't like we're seeing at the moment with the 12-point gap. At the start of those seasons in 17 and 18, the gap was close. It was a close start of the season, but Hamilton, with those levels of consistency, not making the mistakes like Sebastian Vettel did in Germany 2018, Singapore 2017, he managed to take those titles and make them look boring.
It's just kind of really hard to explain in words of just how astonishing that is to put in words, to be fair. And I mean, we're talking about Sebastian Vettel. He's a 4-time world champion. He's not people don't really. He's a former shadow of himself nowadays. But even back in those days, 2017, 2018 Ferrari, he was a force to be reckoned with in the first half of the season. But then for Hamilton just to kick another gear in, especially in the second half of those seasons, and just to wipe away those championships, is just something else.
Yeah. I mean, Jack, do you want to add anything else? Because I can't think of any time period that is up there with the best of all time, though. 17 to 20, that time period. Maybe we're thinking the Schumacher 2000 to 2004, the Senna Prost era.
I mean, yeah, if you want me to list them, he must be, there's Jim Clark in early 60s, but that's when Gentleman Drivers, and he comes up. He's not going to compare today. Maybe you can say the same about late 80s drivers. I think Formula One is constantly improving as we start to move towards in the general direction of a meritocracy. We see more and more people being able to access the sport. That means that the level will get better. So, I think, of course, there are always arguments about who's the greatest of all time. But I am more happy to say now that the drivers that we see in the past were the best of their time, and if they had to step up, they wouldn't have had the facilities, they haven't had the training. So if they got put in the Formula One cars of these days, they wouldn't be as good.
Yeah,
that's not the 100% admission that maybe some people want, and it's not the Schumacher is the best that maybe other people's want. But no, you cannot leave him out of the question. There's if you cannot dismiss him at all.
Yeah, and we'll come on to just that discussion about his legacy right at the end. I mean, Chime, do you have any final thoughts just about this period from 2017 to 2019?
No, just utter dominance is what it is. There's no other way to put it.
Yeah, I couldn't put it better myself, but we'll take another quick break. Then we'll come back, talk about the 2020 season, but this time sort of talk about more what Lewis Hamilton was doing off the track, because with the dominance that he had on the track that season, it was sort of off the track where he was making the most impact on the I'd say on the sport and on wider society in general. And welcome back to the Warwick F1 show with me, Will Kingswood, Jack Rowe and Chinmay. But we're back with the 2020 season. A season that we'll quickly go over his sporting successes. Hamilton's most dominant season statistically, with 10 wins in 17 races. I think it was 14 out of 17 podiums. Obviously, he had COVID for one of the races, so couldn't even compete. Loses one podium due to a collision with Alex Albon at the start of the season. Loses another with an illegal pit stop. Again, then gets a 10-second stop-go penalty. But other than that, I mean, basically a perfect season.
Yeah, I mean, I reckon it. What can you say about it? Like, 2020 provided some good races because the Ferrari was all over the place, because we had McLaren stepping up, because the midfield was closer than ever. But what wasn't true was that we had a good championship battle. You're right. I mean, statistically and just like on common sense, that was his fastest, probably his best season, right? I mean, yeah, 2007, 2008, great for storylines and stuff, but on a pure domination scale, yeah, he did very, very well.
I mean, anything else to add?
I think there's one race in that season that just showed how good Hamilton was that season, and that was the race where he won his 7th World Championship in Turkey with those let's call them interslicks, and the way he just dominated, coming like a minute in front of the field. It was just you couldn't ask for a much better drive for somebody to win a record-breaking 7th World Championship with.
Yeah, and you talk about his record-breaking 7th World Championship, and I just want to go through some of the records Lewis Hamilton holds. So Lewis Hamilton, the most wins in F1, most points in F1 by almost 1,000. Obviously, new point system.
Yeah, that's a little biased, but I guess he has to compete against Vettel as well on that one.
Most consecutive race starts, most entries with a single engine manufacturer, most consecutive points finishes, only ended by the Sakir Grand Prix, where obviously he had COVID so couldn't take part. Most pole positions with 101. Only driver to be above 100, and only driver to be above, or not above 100, but be into the triple digits on race wins as well. Most podium finishes, most races finished in the points, most consecutive race finish, again only ended by the Sakir Grand Prix, where obviously he couldn't take part. Most laps led, most races leading every lap, most poles and wins in the same race. Only driver to win in every single season completed, which I think I would almost class as one of, like, obviously there's the most poles, most race wins, but that's up there with one, like, his greatest, like, records.
Yeah, no, I've tried to mention it a couple of times because I still find that absolutely phenomenal. Like, we look at let's think Formula E, right? Incredibly competitive. It's been around for 7 seasons total, and there is one driver who has done that. And then you look at Formula One. Hamilton's been 15 years, is it now? 15 years in the sport, and he's been quality enough to win. In most seasons, I think all but one multiple races, right?
Yeah.
It was just that 2013 season.
So 2013 he won 1, 2009 he won 2, and I think 2011 he also won 2 or 3. But
oh no, only 2 races.
I know, that's the thing. And then we have some records he shares. So obviously most world championships, most wins in his first championship season, tied with Villeneuve, as we said before. Most wins at the same Grand Prix. And he's done that twice. He's got that record at 2 different tracks. He's got it at the British Grand Prix and the Hungarian Grand Prix. So most consecutive wins at the same Grand Prix. Most consecutive seasons with at least 1 Grand Prix win. Obviously, Schumacher managed 15 in the end, from when he started winning in 92 all the way up to 2006. That sounds right? Yeah. Most podium finishes in a season, and then fewest world championship seasons before the first title, with 2, as we mentioned earlier, with Jacques Villeneuve. I mean, Timmy, does one of those records like stand out to you? And like, just overall, can you believe just how many records Lewis Hamilton holds?
I'm just thinking, what records are even left to break?
Yeah, I know. So, I guess
8th World Championship. I think that one makes him stand head and shoulders above everyone else, right?
Yeah.
I think if I can answer that same question, his performance at the British Grand Prix, especially, that's always, that's brought the crowd round to him, especially given that. Yeah, Button was established in the sport before he came along and has always been more of a crowd favourite. We can argue about why that is all day long, but you cannot argue that he loves that British crowd and they love him when he shows up at Silverstone.
Yeah, so I guess that finishes off sort of Lewis Hamilton's driving career. Obviously, we've talked all season about the 2021 season. So we don't need to go into that. But we'll talk about 2020. And I think it's the year that Lewis Hamilton really had much more an impact off the track than on it. Obviously, we come into the first race of the season last year. It's a delayed start, so we only come into it in June. And that's in the wake of the murder of George Floyd by Derek Chauvin in America, and the like re-emergence of the Black Lives Matter movement from where we saw it in sort of 2014, 2013 in like Ferguson, Missouri and places like that. And Lewis Hamilton put his full support behind that, behind the movement. And I think it's not really something we've seen before, is it? A driver putting their like platform to bring to attention, using their platform to bring to attention injustice in the world on such on a sporting scale, especially in F1.
I mean, yeah, it's just like, I think with any chance Hamilton gets to really promote diversity and equality, he throws his full weight behind it. I want to mean full weight. I don't think people really knows how powerful he can be as a person, because he's someone with so much fame and so much influence, and he's doing such a good job at using his influence to try and promote that diversity. Is just something. And the fact that he is one of the first people to really throw his weight behind something like this, it's remarkable.
Yeah, so I'll read out what he posted on Instagram in the wake of the George Floyd murder. I see those of you who are staying silent. Some of you the biggest stars, yet you stay silent in the midst of injustice. Not a sign from anybody in my industry, which of course is a white-dominated sport. I'm one of the only people of colour there, yet I stand alone. I would have thought by now you would see why this happened and say something about it. but you can't stand alongside us. Just know I know who you are and I see you. I do not stand with those looting and burning buildings, but those who are protesting peacefully. There can be no peace until our so-called leaders make change. This is not just America. This is the UK. This is Spain. This is Italy and all over. The way minorities are treated has to change. How you educate those in your country of equality, racism, classism, and that we are all the same. We are not born with racism and hate in our hearts. It is taught by those who we look up to. I think that is incredibly powerful. And it is coming from a driver who has had to deal with these things all of his career. And I would say that it's notable that what he has done over the last season, I think, has made a change. Obviously, he took the knee at every race. A gesture, I think, that if you're against that, I do question you as a person. At the Tuscan Grand Prix, he stood up to demand justice for Breonna Taylor, who was killed in her bedroom by police. He's continued to advocate for racial equality into this season. And I think his stance has been not backed up by the other drivers, but also they now have the confidence to speak out on issues that they feel are important. I'm thinking this season, as an example, Sebastian Vettel's taken much more of a stance on environmentalism, like littering after races and things like that. And I think that you could probably give Lewis Hamilton credit for being the first one to stand up, take a stance on something that he truly believes in, and encouraging the other drivers to follow.
Yeah, I think I'm going to take it back at least a couple of years, if you don't mind.
Yeah. No.
2017 was a bit of a turnaround year for him. I'm going to speak a little bit badly of him now, but I promise you that it is in good intention. In 2017, he posted the image of his nephew in the dress, right? If you've not heard of that incident, I'd recommend looking it up. And he receives backlash, heavy backlash, and entirely validated. And then he changes as a human being, right? From until that point, he's been very quiet on racism. He said previously that he wanted to forget that, he was apathetic. Whether that's, there's people will say that's the view you should take, right? But he's clearly improved since then. He's seen himself, and he's seen that he stands alone at the top of the sport. He now represents Formula One, right? There's no question of that. They're nodding, I promise. And he's made himself a better person, and that's what we should be striving for. That's what I find admirable, not the fact that he's able to stand up and preach about it, but that he's made the change in his own life as well. I think you're right. There are people. The entire grid has become a better place because of him, and we see the hypocrisy reflected in Formula One, right? We see the fact we're going to Saudi Arabia, and it's making people more and more uncomfortable, and that's a good thing, because when people are uncomfortable and they have a leader, they have someone who's willing to step up and say that these things are wrong. And if you don't like Hamilton, and I know a lot of people don't, then you've got Vettel. He's standing right next to him, right? Those two together, I hope to God, are going to make this sport something that we can be even more proud of, because there are there are definitely good things that Formula One is doing, and I'd love for those two to continue.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Vettel. I completely forgot that in Hungary he was standing up for LGBTQ plus rights as well. Like, I think that the drivers these days know they've got a platform, and I think that they are beginning to use it a lot more, especially some of the older drivers who don't necessarily have that many years left in F1. We don't think Vettel or Hamilton
It's about leaving a legacy, right?
Yeah,
it's the legacy of positive change rather than just
exactly.
You're not a 4-time world champion. You're that person who has made the world a better place as well.
Exactly.
Because let's be real, multiple-time world champions get hated on because they're popular, because they're doing well at the sport. But Sebastian Vettel's the nicest guy, isn't he? We don't see that, and hopefully in 3 or 4 years' time we'll say exactly the same for Lewis Hamilton, regardless of whether you like him currently or not.
Yeah, and it's about leaving a legacy, and it's about growing as a person. As you say with Lewis Hamilton there, he's undeniably improved as a person, and that's what I think we should all be doing. You don't have to take, on Twitter, everyone takes the past as gospel. You can't change as a person, but we see here that you can. Lewis Hamilton has changed as a person. He has changed for the better, and now he's encouraging other people to change for the better as well.
I mean, yeah, it's not just Lewis's stance on racism, it's also his stance on ecoism, the environmentalism, the amount he's done to try and promote being more eco-friendly alongside Sebastian Vettel is just, it's just been really remarkable to show how he's been able to develop himself as a person, show it to others, and also try and spread that goodness to others as well.
Yeah, and not only has Hamilton been trying to make a difference outside the sport, as you said, he's trying to leave a legacy within the sport. We had the Hamilton Commission that is now aiming to try and get more people from ethnic minority backgrounds into the sport. We have Mission 44, which is his charitable organisation set up by him to help young people from underrepresented backgrounds achieve their ambitions in wider society. Not even to get into F1, but just to be able to achieve what they want. And that is how it should be. It should be a level playing field as much as possible across society, so everyone on merit can achieve the best that they can achieve. And I think that Lewis Hamilton has been one of the standout figures, I'd say almost across sport, in helping both his sport achieve more equality, but also helping the wider society achieve equality as well. Yeah,
there's him and Marcus Rashford, right? And who else would you say? Certainly in Britain, those two, above and beyond.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. So, we look at Marcus Rashford as well, who's someone that is also aiming to help underrepresented or people from underrepresented backgrounds, and these are the sportsmen that we should be looking up to. You can point at their flaws either in the past or maybe now. Maybe Hamilton, some people could say, is hypocritical for they would say preaching on environmentalism while still driving in F1, which is obviously quite an environmentally unfriendly sport. But you've got to look at the good as well. You've got to look at what Lewis Hamilton is doing, what Marcus Rashford is doing to help people from underrepresented backgrounds, to help ethnic minorities. And I think that if we can help them as well, if we can become better, we can do more, and then they almost would need to do less, because then not their work is done, because I don't think it will be done for a long time, but if we're all doing more to help, then it means that more help is provided.
I couldn't have said it better myself, to be honest. It's just people. I just still feel that loads of people under appreciate what people like Lewis Hamilton and Marcus Rashford really do to the society, and no matter how involved they are or not actively themselves, the fact that they're using their fame to spread the message is a powerful force in itself to bring good to society.
Yeah. Do you want to add any final words, Jack?
I'm going to just repeat my point. It's improvement in himself, and it's It's that you got to be willing to improve yourself, to see where society is going and get ahead of the curve, right? And that's what we should all be aiming to do. And even if you don't agree with him standing up and screaming from the rooftops, and I don't know why you wouldn't, you can understand that you have to make yourself that person. You have to be willing to change, and I admire that about him.
Yeah, and you can see the development from in 2007, a young, fresh-faced, 23-year-old coming into the sport, achieving his dream, but also being a trailblazer within Formula One. To now, we get the 2021 Lewis Hamilton, who is a trailblazer, but in a different way. He's putting himself out there, putting himself out there, putting his views out there, and aiming to make both the sport and the world a better place. But we'll take a final break, and then we'll come back and we'll talk finally about just Lewis Hamilton's overall legacy within F1. For the final 10 minutes, we're going to be talking about Lewis Hamilton's legacy in F1, where he stands among the greats, both on the sporting side and on the outside side, I guess. But first, we've got a final guest joining us for the last 10 minutes. It's our head of news here at Raw 12:51 AM and big F1 fan, Cam Hall.
Big F1 fan, so much so I have my own podcast, the Armchair F1 podcast, which does have another episode coming out this week, so make sure to be looking out for that.
You can't just come in here and get free promo.
You just said the outside,
did, right?
So well, in the words of Martin Brundle, I can, and I did.
I said the outside side. That makes sense. But, yeah, maybe it doesn't.
But why did you have to bring Martin Brundle into this?
Because Martin Brundle is a legend, and everyone should be standing him.
Get us back on topic.
Speaking of legends,
yeah, exactly. Thank you. That is the sort of segue that we like. Speaking of legends,
this is why our podcast is better.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
He's not invited on again, is he?
Oh no.
Okay. So yeah, speaking of legends, I've nicked that one. Lewis Hamilton's legacy. So we read out the records that he's got. Most wins, most poles, joint most championships, only driver to win in every season, most consecutive wins, most wins debut season, least amount of seasons before first title. I could go on. I mean, the article did go on and I read them all out. But where does that put him compared to the other greats? Like your Fangios, your Prost, your Sennas, your Clarks, your Schumachers even. And maybe even your Vettels and like Lauders and other drivers that we'd think maybe not quite at the top, but just below.
We no longer have that question of whether he is the best. You then have the question of how can you compare those people?
Yeah.
Right? Because there's no question he's the best driver of the modern era. Sebastian Vettel doesn't factor into it for me. I think maybe that's because of recency bias as well.
I think Vettel's second. I'd give Vettel's second place of the modern era.
Sure, yeah. But I just don't think it's not a level playing field. Hamilton's been dominant throughout.
Yeah.
Vettel in the past few years especially has shown that he's no longer quite got that level, and so from 2006 onwards, it's clear. I suppose 2007 onwards, it's clear who the best driver of the modern era is. Whether you can compare him to those drivers, I always like to say Jim Clark was the best. But that's you can't say, right? If you put Jim Clark in a modern F1 car, or you give him the same training, is he likely to be better? We said this earlier, didn't we?
Yeah.
Or at least I think I made my opinion clear. I think Hamilton is. On driving skill, if you put them all on equal cars right now, you somehow revive them all in their peak, I think Hamilton would beat them. But because F1 is getting better and better and better.
Yeah. Cam?
I mean, this is one point where me and Jack totally agree. I think Jim Clark is perhaps the only driver, maybe Senna as well. I mean, a lot of my love for Senna, I do always acknowledge, is very romantic. I think from a driving standard, Jim Clark is probably the only driver who I would say comes close to Lewis Hamilton, and that was just because of his relentless pace in those Lotuses in the 60s, which were, I mean, they were extremely good cars, and he was always getting the best out of them. But there was always an inconsistency with the Lotuses as well. Of course, Lewis Hamilton, he's had amazing cars whilst he's been at Mercedes, but even before he was at Mercedes and at McLaren, he was extracting so much from some, at times, some very terrible cars. So I have no doubt Lewis Hamilton has deserved each and one of his championships that he's won. And it's not as well, because the argument I know someone would say, for example, are you going Hamilton versus Jim Clark? Well, look at who Jim Clark was beating in the 1960s. Jackie Stewart, Jochen Rindt, Jack Brabham, Graham Hill, some of the biggest names in the sport. And you could argue, okay, Lewis Hamilton hasn't had that amount of such intense competition at once, but he has had to work hard for every championship. The way that he has taken the Mercedes and effectively dominated, particularly towards the end of the season, really put distance between himself and every other driver in the field. The fact that he does, just take some of those races like Turkey last year, Britain 2008, the fact that he puts himself in just a complete other league to everyone else on the grid. And there's only a few drivers in F1 history who have ever really done races like that. And there's Michael Schumacher, for example, only had that once in his career. Really, Lewis Hamilton has had that consistently over quite a few times. So, yeah, it's difficult to compare between eras. But Lewis Hamilton is the best undoubtedly of this era, the best undoubtedly of the millennia, the best, certainly, I would say, of the last 25, 30 years since Prost Senna. So, yeah, I think his legacy is completely unrivaled, both on and off the track as well. I think if you take him out of Formula One and into British sport more generally, and I mean, that is a very difficult debate to do. That's even harder to compare because the disciplines are so different. But in terms of someone dominating their sport for so long, I can't think of any British sports person who has done it in the way that Lewis Hamilton has. And that is really his legacy as an F1 driver. And considering the fact as well that Lewis Hamilton is unlike the vast majority of every other F1 driver who's come on the grid based upon his background, not just his race, but his social background as well, and the way he got into Formula One. It is a truly remarkable career, and it says a lot about just how great a driver he is, how he definitely deserves to be in the conversation as the greatest of all time, and how he easily could arguably be the greatest of all time.
Okay.
I like you now. You can go. I can promote your podcast again. I would say Sir Mo Farah, but of course we have Sir Lewis Hamilton. He's rightfully received that knighthood, right?
Yeah. Chinmay?
How can I add on to that, honestly? But yeah, it's. But personally, you can't give an absolute go to Formula One because eras are so different to each other. It's so difficult just to really compare drivers from different eras. Like, you can't really compare Senna's era to Fangio's era or Fangio's era to Lewis Hamilton's era. But just it's the level of domination he showed on a consistent basis. Even if he's had the best car on the grid, which he's had multiple times, but to deliver on that consistent basis and to keep the car on the track and in front of the grid at least 40, 45, 50 seconds in front of the grid on a consistent basis, there's nothing more to say. He is one of the greatest of all time. Just hands down, you can't say more.
I mean, I think I'll give my thoughts quickly. So I would say that there are probably 5 drivers I'd put as in the. I don't think you can have, obviously, as Chinmay said, you can't really have a greatest of all time in F1 because obviously the cars are so different. But I think there's 5 drivers that I'd put up there, either through pure pace, through what they did, or just a combination of both. So you've got Fangio from the 50s, Jim Clark from the 60s, 70s and 70s, maybe there isn't one from that decade.
You could put Jackie Stewart in there, feasibly. And there's always the great counterfactual of what happened if neither Jim Clark nor Jochen Rindt died. And the amount of championships they could have won, which I know is a complete aside from this, but just to leave it in our listeners' heads.
Yeah. So maybe Jackie Stewart.
I'd say him not having him is justified.
Yeah. 80s and early 90s, probably Prost. So that's not Prost, sorry, Senna. I'd say Senna, Prost.
I mean, leaving one of them out is difficult, to be fair.
Maybe Prost, maybe Senna, maybe even both. But I think Senna would be my third. Early 2000s / late 90s, Schumacher. And then late zero. What is it? The zeros?
Noughties.
Well,
that's this millennium.
But they didn't really give the last decade a name apart from just the 2010s. There's not like a teenies or something. I've never heard that used.
But late noughties into the 10s, it's got to be Lewis Hamilton. I think those 5 are the greatest 5 of all time. They're either the quickest, Clark and Senna and probably Fangio, or they're the most consistent, like Hamilton and Schumacher a bit more. And then arguably you could say Hamilton and Schumacher combine the two into 7 world titles each. So I think that you can't really say there's a GOAT, but obviously Hamilton, with his 7 world titles, has to be up there. And then in addition to what he's done outside the sport, the amount of in the last few years, the amount of advocacy work he's done, promoting racial equality, promoting environmentalism, both in the sport and outside the sport, as I'd say almost another level to his performance. And maybe that would push it, for me, into the greatest of all time. See, if we take stats, there's stats to make any or most drivers the greatest of all time. Hamilton has the most. Clark I think it's Ascari has the highest percentage, or Fangio or someone like that.
Yeah, I'd say with Lewis Hamilton, I think the one thing that if you were to put him as the greatest of all time, statistically he's the greatest of all time, and the stats, absolutely applaud Lewis Hamilton. But also off track as well, there are only 2 other drivers, I would say, in the history of Formula 1 who've had as much impact off the track as Lewis Hamilton: Sir Jackie Stewart and Ayrton Senna. And I think when you take that into consideration, when you put both the stats and the off track advocacy together, then really Lewis Hamilton is just slightly ahead of the other drivers. But then it is so hard to make that comparison. But Lewis Hamilton has had such a unique contribution both on and off track that you could argue only Senna possibly comes close to. But that is just how hard it is to try and make a greatest of all time in Formula 1, because you are literally comparing between a time where you would race like 5 different, almost like 2 or 3 different cars a race. So it is remarkable, and just Lewis Hamilton, undoubtedly one of the greatest of all time. Yeah,
and I think that's something we all agree on, is that Lewis Hamilton, a trailblazer in the sport, has ended up being one of the greatest drivers of all time. But I think that ends the show. So, any final thoughts from my guests? I'll start with Jack.
How can you add to that? I want to see where he ends up. I want to see where he's going, right? That's what's incredible, that 15 years into his career, that I believe he can still go on to win more and more and more and have such an impact.
Okay, Chinmay, quickly.
I just want to see how he does finish his career as well, like Jack said. It just, especially with the new regulations, and see how he really, really puts his foot down, and to see how much more he can contribute than he already has.
Yeah, and finally Cam.
Lewis Hamilton will be an 8-time world champion. You've heard it here. It may not be this year. I'm increasingly nervous about this year. But if it's not this year, it will be next year or the year after. But I feel just for anyone who compares him to Schumacher, he just needs that 8th championship to get ahead. He will get that 8th championship. And if that is what sets him apart from every other driver, well, do you know what? It's totally deserved.
Well, we can live in hope. But that has been Raw Sports Black History Month special, focusing on Lewis Hamilton. Thank you for listening. Thank you for taking part, my guests. So thank you, Jack. Thank you, Chinmay, and thank you, Cam, for your quick cameo. But we'll end it off with airplanes.
With a terrible pun.
Oh yeah, I didn't notice that.
Okay, sorry.
I'll always say Enoch will not be happy right now that you are slowly taking his thunder as the pun master at Raw.
I didn't even notice.
Do you want to do the outro?
Yeah, I'll do that. But yeah, we'll outro now.